Okay, so I think few would doubt that that's a really good summary of where the dairy industry's at. So in getting a sheep and beef perspective, I'd like to introduce Dan Brier, who's been farming in his own right, has spent a few years in Palmu in a very big corporate, and is now the General Manager of Farming in Beef+Lamb New Zealand. And the conversations I've had with Dan, he's always got very clear thinking. I've known both Dan and his father and his brother for years, and it's a bit of a family approach there. And they're all very clear thinkers in the sheep and beef industry, and I welcome you to the stage.
Thank you very much. I've got some slides here. Thank you.
Technology is not my...
Sorry,
I stand still on your foot as well.
And so while you're doing that, I'll just thank you for having me. Thank you. Congratulations to LIC and Dairy NZ for the space tool. I'm involved with our future farm down in North Canterbury, and so we have started trying to set up using the tool there. So we haven't quite got it rolling yet, but starting to move along that road. Yeah, just flick it forward. Cool. And for my background, for my sins, I'm a veterinarian. I grew up here in Hamilton. In fact, this is very much in mana whenua. Grew up in Hamilton and Tamahiri and Matangi and places like that. I need to move over. Sorry, I'm missing the camera. And farmed out in the King Country, in the northern King Country with lots of input. And as we'll get to later down the track, modelling tools and how we use these sorts of tools has always been a really and pasture in particular, a really important way of how I see farming and how I farm. So thank you very much for having me along. So I've sort of just put this together without nearly as much actual hard data as Mark had for us, and a bit more of Dan's sort of view of the world. And I thought just a little bit of a current state in the sheep and beef industry from a pasture management point of view, roll through sort of where I see some opportunities, perhaps some hurdles, and then we might get to some of my favourite things. So here's a question for you. What percentage of red meat farmers say they measure feed supply and grass growth when surveyed? 2015 the survey was done.
10%. 60%.
In the other we've got a 10%, we've got a 50%. Or was it a 60, did you say, Andrew? 60, sorry, Andrew. This is survey result, right? 58%. Someone might have been at that party before, I reckon. And so I was pretty heartened by that. 60% of farmers measuring pasture, feed supply and grass growth. But of those, 84% use their gut or their eye. So obviously a bit of a disconnect there between what I say and how I do it, which is why I'm excited by tools like this, right? Tools like the space thing, because to be fair to hill country farmers, it's really hard to do much else than just use your eye or use your gut. I'm not sure if a sword stick is counted as using your gut and eye or whether that's a tool, but it's without those sorts of tools, it's really, really hard to do anything else. What I do see our farmers doing is block budgets better. And this is particularly in the South Island around our cropping. I think farmers are getting are much better at that than they used to be. And dare I say it, I think it's been potentially driven by dairy industry, right? If you're selling 12 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, you actually need to have some sort of idea of what that is. Also, I think the support from agronomists and rural supply stores, so someone can come along and say, that's a 12-tonne kale crop or that's a 8-tonne kale crop, particularly when you need to keep selling those products and keep people involved in that cycle of cropping. You need there's that conversation going on which helps drive that. Whole farm feed budgets linked to actual data and animal performance, and perhaps James might have a better insight into that than I, but I would be surprised if that was much above 5%. Particularly linked to actual data and animal performance. So certainly quite a bit of the FarmX type modelling where this is what the whole farm's going to do. But in terms of really having a handle on that and following it and tracking that, much, much lower. And so this is an incredibly unscientific value of feed budgeting. So when I used to work for an organisation, I looked after farms around the country, and one of them was this farm in Kaikoui, which was about 4,500 hectares, big farm. The farm manager there was, Kaikoura is a hard place to get staff, and so he was there pretty much because he was the last man standing rather than too much else, if everyone was honest with themselves. 2,500 hectares. It was a farm that had a really good reputation, but it was starting to fall. It was a bullock finishing farm from the good old days. And now the steers were starting to come out as yearlings rather than being finished as a 2-year-old, so having to sell them store rather than finishing them. Ewe numbers were dropping, whether that was a bad thing or not, depends on whether you live in Northland. The dairy bulls, which were supposed to be coming out in October, weren't reaching weight, and so we ended up having to carry them through and finish them, or just force them on our dairy brothers at underweight. And that particular year, when I first looked after this farm, we made an EBIT of about 350 grand. So 150 sort of dollars a hectare there, if you run your maths. Bottom quintile for Northland, and a waste of investment. So that farm manager left for a whole number of reasons. But specifically not because he was a bad feed manager, right? He left for some other reasons. And a new manager came on. And so the new manager, within a season, he was finishing the steers that I'd been transferring out to other farms. Lambing performance in the ewe flock improved, and the EBIT went up to 850 grand in a year. So there's always, particularly on sheep farms, all farms, right, there's millions of reasons why these things happen. But the single biggest effect was his feed planning and his feed organisation. And it wasn't anything flash. He had me to do his FarmX files for him and help him work through. He had essentially, a lot of his staff were illiterate, but he had them looking at what they thought their cover coming out was, thinking about what their cover was going in, and doing those real simple block maths. And as I say, that's a huge amount of money in anyone's language, right? He still only moved the farm to $350 a hectare, so it's still only middle of the road for Northland, but I'd take $500,000 any day of the week. And the other interesting thing about that too, right, he has moved the EBIT. When I was thinking about this last night, he's also moved the capital value of the farm. So we know about the operational income, but suddenly he's moved it from being a, 6 stock unit farm to an 8 stock unit farm or whatever the real estate agents are selling farms in. And so there's a short-term and a long-term gain for that particular property. And then you get all of the other flow-on effects, right? The pasture species start to improve, you see a whole lot more clover coming through, all of that good stuff. So I often think of this, and I might have even had this conversation with Graham another time, but to Mark's point, it's really cheap to do, and there's payback there if you do it well. Good feed planning. The hard part is understanding why people don't do it. Right, so this is some characteristics out of this that RMPP work, so Red Meat Profit Partnership from 2015. And these are just some comments. Top performers pay close attention to the basics such as growing grass, keeping their stock healthy and feeding them well. Focusing on details is critical to these activities. Aligned grass growth to the market opportunities, and pivotal to the practice of feeding stock well is the time and effort allocated to weighing and condition scoring to informing feed decisions. So this was top 10% farmers. The interesting thing there, I thought about that bottom one, was there's no comment there about their attention to detail of measuring pasture. It's about measuring the animals, and it's about feeding and animal condition. This work was repeated a few months ago, and went back to those same farmers and interviewed them again. And interesting, the focus had shifted. So it was sort of assumed that they were still good at everything else they were already good at, and then what's the new problem? What's things that drive you now? And it's that social licence and environment and the regulation changes which we hear so much about. But in that second document, when I did a quick word search, no mention of grass, no mention of feed. Again, as I say, it was sort of underlying in there that these people were really good operators, but there was still talk about finances, still talk about family and succession, those sorts of things, but nothing about feed. So I have had this question asked before. If I had a magic wand, I'd help New Zealand sheep and beef farmers be better at feeding and allocating. A really interesting thing, and I learned this at Landcorp as well. I had a farm manager who was a good farm manager, a lovely guy, and he could do just do a beautiful feed budget. So he'd have all of his allocations, and we'd sit down and we'd do it over the computer or whatever, and he would have, he'd have, the cows were going to get 7 kilos because I'm winding them back a bit. And I've got some dairy calves on, and they're going to get 5 kilos of grass and a kilo of silage, and the ewes are going to get this, and the lambs are getting that, and this is how it's all working. And then I said, yep, no, sweet, I can park that one and find someone else to go and help. And then sort of 3 weeks later, I get a phone call and say, I've ordered up a truck and trailer unit of silage. Hang on, we just did that feed budget a while ago, you had plenty. What happened? He said, well, when I put it in the paddock, cows ate it all. I said, yeah, but you weren't feeding it to the cows, you're feeding it to the calves. No, they're all together. Which it wasn't quite as bad as that, to be fair. But it really reminded me that actually one of our biggest challenges is not doing the feed budget, it's actually applying the feed budget and getting the allocation right. So, with sheep and beef farms, particularly with lots of different classes of stock, feeding bulls, so finishing bulls over here, feeding them 9 kilos, while keeping my breeding cows back to 6 or 7 kilos, makes a massive difference to the total feed plate, right? Feeding ewes, and I write into my feed budget, I'm going to give my ewes 1 kilo of grass, but actually they're eating 2 across 1,000 ewes. These numbers are big numbers, and they change really quickly. So I actually see this, that allocating is probably the bigger challenge on sheep and beef farms for once people start measuring, is getting that allocating right. So if I had a magic wand to do both of those things, not just one. Some hurdles. This is the old meat and wool rule. What you don't measure, you can't manage. And that's to start with, probably our biggest problem, is that we can't measure pasture really well on lots of our farms. And that's potentially a whole lot of things. Potentially it's confidence, maybe it's tools, maybe there's some science missing around how we measure that well. But what we don't measure, we can't manage. So it's really hard to tell someone, with 5 paddocks, we've mentioned the 5 paddock farm, it's really hard to tell them to be a better feed budget, right? Variability in production, and so the changing nature of seasons. As I say, I look after the Future Farm at a bit of a distance down in North Canterbury, and when they have the North Canterbury summers there, it all goes out the window. Some years they grow a lot of feed, some years they don't, and for the guys who are in that, really hard for them to see the point of sort of thinking 2 months away when there's so much variation, so much variability in what the outcome is. Mixed messages. So this one is really, really interesting, and I think it's getting harder to be a good feed budgeter at the moment rather than easier. And that's because this challenge between environment, putting a lot of animals in a smaller area versus my good feed management. I hear people talking about this flash new thing, regenerative farming, which I'm sure you're all converts to. And my rotation should be longer, and perhaps I should be leaving my pastures longer in the summer and then coming back and cleaning them up later on. I hear about deferred grazing, and that's sort of a different thing again. And with the swirly messages, I believe it's getting harder for people to get their head around the real simple, a nice spring rotation planner is getting harder to hold in your head. I don't think we should underestimate why people are farming, right? So for people like me who quite like a spreadsheet, feed budget's a fun thing to do. In fact, when we first went farming, my wife and I, she thought I had a computer game I was playing all night. And I'm on Farmax, just moving some mobs around and doing some bits and pieces. But for a lot of people, that's not the same, right? So lots of people get into farming because they like the outdoors, they like the dogs, they like all of those things. And so to try and sit in front of a computer or sit in front and try and understand, conceptualise some of these ideas is bloody hard work, and we shouldn't underestimate it. Language. So I've got HCF there to remind me. So we've just done some research through our Hill Country Futures project where they've gone and interviewed 160 farmers for long sit-down, in-depth interviews with them about a whole range of things. And one of the things that came out of that was that disconnect in language that people like us who sit in rooms like this compared to people who live in Taihape or Cheviot or somewhere. And not that anyone's is wrong, but actually if we're talking different languages, we can never understand the same thing. Headspace, this sort of speaks back to the mixed messages really. I was talking with Ben Allomes the other night from a dairy farmer who many of you will know, and what we were saying, the point he was making, is that there's not a capability issue for farmers, there's a capacity issue. Farmers are just full to the brim with accountants and legal things and regulatory things and genetics and just all of this stuff. And actually pushing new stuff in is pushing new knowledge or helping people understand things is just hard work. What else have I got? Connectivity. So every time I talk about hill country farms, I've mentioned connectivity. And farm systems. So the challenge of those changing farm systems, whether it's regenerative, whether it's moving to different farming systems, but thinking about those as opposed to a much simpler single species, those sorts of things, right? Cool. So those are some hurdles. So I feel like I'm spitballing at you here, but thank you for indulging me. Some opportunities, right? Improved measurement. So something like this space, pastures from space, these sorts of things, are a great opportunity because as we remove roadblocks or as we remove reasons why people can't do things, then it makes it easier for people to do things, right? Another opportunity I see as well, it's a little bit of a sideline, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to use farm planning as a way to help us do lots of things on farm better. So farm planning is coming at us from central government, essentially. I'm not sure what Dairy NZ's plan is, but we're planning to get out in front of our farmers, come up with a farm plan, which is really built on saying that the idea being that we're trying to help farmers be better, and as an outcome, they might also pass off some regulatory requirements, right? So understanding what's out on your farm, this is simple stuff, right? Understanding what you've got out on your farm, what you're trying to achieve, and how the natural resources you've got around you help you feed to that. And then maybe some actions you're going to do to improve them, right? Excuse me. My hope, and maybe I'm drawing a bit of a long bow here, but my hope is that getting into that process, whether it's driven by government or whomever it is, of having to sit down, do some forward planning, see how you're going at that, implementing, reviewing, coming around, will help with our feed management and some of our other things as well. So start off with the four which the government's driving the water and the climate ones, but soil and biodiversity as the four natural capitals. And then start to, animal health and these other things will start rolling into this, whether it's driven by markets or whomever. But I hope that we can fold good feed planning and animal nutrition, if you like, into that as well. Maybe something for someone who's cleverer than me to think about. All right, a couple of my thoughts on technologies and innovations. I'm a big believer in silver bullets. Most people laugh, just like Graham did, when I say I'm a big believer in silver bullets, because overnight success takes 10 years and all that sort of stuff. But I guess this goes back to farmers, humans, actually doing easy stuff, right? We take the easy path. And if we can come up with solutions that, from a farmer's point of view, are easy to implement and just happen, lots of the characteristics that Mark was just talking about, right? Easy that happen without me needing to think too much, and it gives me a couple of ideas, and these things just happen. They're much, much more likely to work. As soon as I have to invest energy, then the barriers are so much harder, and even if it's only a tiny bit of energy. We're lucky that we've got Google and Apple spending billions of dollars in developing these tools we carry around with us every day, but we're also unlucky because that sets the bar really, really high, right, for what everyone else has to achieve whenever they look at an app or a tool. Big fan of silver bullets. The other thing is that they need to be collaborative. So I was with, Ben Allomes and the Nuffield scholars a few weeks ago. I was with our farmer council. We're down in Wellington last week, and if there's one thing that our farmers bring up time and time again, it's about the collaborative nature of things. They want us to be collaborative. They want to work with each other, And when it comes to their data and information, they say collaborative, and what they mean is interoperable, right? Things have to go to lots of places. I mean, this is, I'm banging a drum that you've all heard before, but it needs to go, needs to be available to lots of things. If they're entering data or data's been collected on their behalf, that they only touch it once and it gets to lots of places. So I'd absolutely hang that hat again, particularly as we do move into a sort of a farm planning world where the government's going to want more information and know what's going on. So I'd encourage that. Cool. Nearly at the end. A couple of things that techs and initiatives that excite me. The first one I sort of have to say, but I do like it, is Improve. So Improve's a tool which Beef+Lamb Genetics has developed with all sorts of funding, but RMPP's involved there. Rozier's done the work to help farmers get access to and understand breeders who have got sheep which are fit for their purpose. As I said, big fan of Farmax. I like what Farmax has done for a long time. I was thinking about this the other day. I reckon the first time I got involved with feed budgeting, I was definitely at primary school, sitting next to Dad doing VP Planner, and then it turned into stockpole and all the way through, right? So big fan of Farmax. It's a useful tool. Yeah, we can talk about it. And my next favourite one, which is coming along, is virtual collars. So I like virtual collars for a couple of reasons. The first is that there's a reason for farmers to use them, which at the moment is about riparian management. But the additive benefits once we get collars on cows with a system that works and all of those reliable and all those sorts of things created around feed management, opportunities, things like creep gazing cows with calves, the ability to allocate sections of paddocks rather than needing paddocks fenced off, keeping the cows, or older stock down on worse country and better off campsites and those sorts of things. So real opportunities there from a farm management point of view to get some great additive benefits out of non-farm management decision to put it in, which is around the fencing. And that's me, really.
Thanks, Dan.
That's all right. It's all right. It's a pretty whistle-stop sort of a tour.
That's what I asked for. I sent each speaker Graham's wish list of what they could cover, so thank you, Dan, you did that well.